All right. Good morning, ladies and gents. I hope you're good today. My name is Mr. TJ Tubani, and I'm the lecturer for Risk Management 1.1. We're going to start today with a very basic chapter. And the reason why we're doing this particular chapter, ladies and gents, is to prepare you to be able to do what we call a risk assessment. A risk assessment, ladies and gents, is one of the key functions of any health and safety practitioner that he needs to do. So we're going to start with the basics. Before we can start with the whole process of risk assessment, which we'll get through later on as we go through the chapters, we just want to start with the basics. And the basics is obviously understanding what hazards are. All right. Traditional theory has it that hazards create dangers and threats to men, property, as well as the environment. Manuel, 1994-117, he explains it as the source of safety risk. So he says the source of safety risks or risk is a hazard. Mr. Grimaldi and Simons, 1989-16, they view differently. They say it is a hazard that causes an unwanted and a harmful event. Keep that in mind. Mr. Thygesen, 1977-39, he explains the term hazard. He says the term hazard refers to a condition with the potential of causing death, injury, or property damage. All right. As we continue with the views on hazards, remember what we're doing now. We're looking at the different learned people that have principles in terms of explaining hazards from their different profession or from their experiences. So let's keep them in mind so that later on we're going to obviously sum what everybody says and seize for the purpose of our subject, which is risk management, what hazards really are. And this will take us through in achieving our ultimate goal, which is obviously being able to conduct the risk assessment. The National Safety Council, 1992-750, they say it's an unsafe condition that, if left uncontrolled, may contribute to an accident. Mr. Fuller and Fassi, 2004-6, says a hazard is a disposition, condition, or situation that may be the source of potential harm. Now, the term disposition simply means a character or a mood. Keep that in mind. Let's look at what Mr. Germain, Arnold, and Rowan say. They say it's a condition with the potential for harm. Right. As we continue, let's look at what Mr. Bird and Germain says. They say it's a practice can be a hazard. By implication, this viewpoint sees an act or series of acts, work, methods, or practice as a hazard that has potential to cause harm or damage. Great stuff. As we continue, let's look at what Fuller and Fassi says again. They say things people do or acts like war, crime, use of drugs, and terrorism are hazards. As we continue, Mr. Germain, Arnold, and Rowan again, they say a practice with the potential for harm. But as we're going through this definition up to this point, we can clearly see there is one common word that we can see from all the definition. Obviously, when you look at a hazard, there is always a potential of risk or harm associated with it. Let's keep that in mind. All right. Fuller and Fassi again. They say it's a disposition, a condition, or situation that may be the source of potential harm. And that goes again, the word harm, or which may potentially lead to harm or damage. Harm implies impairment that needs healing or repair or cure. Damage, on the other hand, implies observable destruction of objects or adverse financial consequence. Right. Mr. Van Vliet in Swartz, 2000. Very, very important, ladies and gentlemen. This is one of the key definitions which I want you to remember. Mr. Van Vliet in Swartz says, any tangible object Any tangible, a tangible object, it's anything that you can be touched or you can feel. That's what tangible means. Any tangible object that has the potential to complement or interfere with the performance of any task. All objects possess closing and collision potential. Very, very important. I'm going to repeat it again. Van Vliet in Swartz 2000, 112 says, any tangible object that has the potential to complement or interfere with the performance of a task, meaning that all objects possess closing and collision potential. Mr. Grimaldi and Simmons, they also say something. The source of energy, which when uncontrolled, leads to harmful occurrences. This point of view argues that all objects that meet certain requirements or characteristics are hazards. All right. Now, what we are looking at, ladies and gentlemen, it's theories pertaining to hazards, as I explained earlier. So it is very important that you look at views not only from our perspective, but from everybody else's perspective, so that we can understand and be able to deduce a simple, understandable definition which is key for us to achieve what you want to achieve. All right. Now, what is very important and what you need to take home is this key definition. A hazard, as we have seen, is something that can cause harm, which has echoed from all the theories that we have looked at. And also, it has certain characteristics. And lastly, it can create a safety risk or risks in certain situations. Very important. Something that can cause harm, that has certain characteristics, and can create safety risk in certain situations. Now, this is the key definition that we need to take home, that we need to remember. That definition, including the very definition from Mr. Fuller and Fassi, which I said it was very important. Those are the key definitions that you must take home and remember. All right. Remember, like I said, all the other guys, Simmons, Grimaldi, and all these guys, they were looking at hazards from the context of what they were studying in terms of their fields. Now, from what we have heard from all these guys, and obviously we have deduced a key definitions which I want us to follow it through, what we can pick up from what they have said, there's a clarity on what hazards are really not. So, from a health and safety or risk management point of view, we can safely say hazards are not a disposition, meaning a nature or character or any mood. And we can safely say that hazards are not situations or conditions. Also, we can clearly say that hazards are not directly related to loss. And then also, hazards do not imply departing from the normal situation. And lastly, human acts cannot be hazards. A human act is not tangible, but a human being is tangible. Hazards are not a disposition, meaning that who can control their mood? If you look at, for example, somebody, let's say there's an old lady trying to cross a road, and there's a young gentleman helping this old lady to try and cross the road. So obviously the two, meaning the young man as well as the lady, they are people, meaning that they are tangible. But then, one instance, a lady, let's say the old lady agrees that the gentleman must take him through or pass the road. So they're going to cross the road, and then the lady is going to be safely. Let's say that another example. This very same lady, a young man is trying to help her to try and cross the road, but the old lady refuses. And then probably stops in the middle of the road. Now, we've looked at two different situations. One, a mood is that the lady is in a good mood and the gentleman is trying to be helpful to the old lady to try and make sure that they probably prevent a potential accident which can happen. And then the second one, The lady, because maybe she's not in the right mood, and then she refuses and stops right in the middle of the road, and she exposes herself into danger. That on its own, that disposition, that mood, that character, we cannot refer it as a hazard. Hence the definition of Fuller and Fassi, which says a hazard is always a tangible object. All right, so moods and characters are not tangible. All right, hazards are not a situations or a condition. A situation and condition can change all the time. Therefore, it will be difficult for us to try and prove that a hazard is really a situation, because situation can change. For example, if I am lighting a fire in a fireplace, and then I'm making sure that everything in that particular environment is safe. It's the conditions that have been given through to me. And on the other hand, I can take an imbauler as an example, and then if I light it in the correct way, remember it's a situation or condition, and I put it outside and it can give us enough heat, or we can cook with it, and the area is safe enough, or the conditions that we are given at that particular point in time, they are safe enough and they are controlled. When is that particular situation a hazard, on when that particular situation is not a hazard? So it will be difficult for us to conclude that a hazard is a situation or condition. And hazards are not really directed to loss, because as we're going to ascertain later on, we need hazards as human beings to try and survive. And the mere existence of a hazard does not mean that loss is going to occur. And also, hazards do not imply departing from a normal situation. If we're going to be stressing to determine which situation is normal for me or for you, it's going to be difficult, because what might be normal to me might not be normal to you. So it's going to be difficult. Hence, hazards, we can never say that they imply departing from a normal situations. Human acts cannot be hazards. All right. So what I've just explained, it's exactly that. So I will not get into detail as far as explaining them further, because what I just explained for you, it's very, very important, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, disposition cannot result into adverse effects unless it's displayed in dealing with other people. So that is one thing that you need to understand when it comes to hazards not being a disposition, because there's no consistent base. When it comes to situations or conditions not being hazards, there's only two pertinent questions that we need to answer. Under what conditions will situations be a hazard, and to whom will such situation be a hazard? It will be difficult for us to safely conclude that hazards can be situations or conditions. Hazards not directly related to loss. We're going to be looking at loss causation models at a later stage. Therefore, we're going to see that there's an exposure of hazards in terms of basics and immediate causes, and sometimes because the threshold was not exceeded, it does not relate to loss. So we're going to be looking at that at a later stage. Hazards not implying departing from a normal situation. Like I said, the question that I posed to us, what is normal to you might not be normal to me. For whom is what normal? So people have different lives. We come from different backgrounds, different situations, different environments. So it's going to be very difficult to try and argue that a situation is a hazard. Human acts cannot be hazards. A few questions that we need to ask ourselves: what types of acts are hazards? Are those acts tangible? Yes or no? When will human acts be hazards? Under what conditions would an act be or become a hazard? Therefore, from our conclusion that human acts can never be hazards. What hazards really are? Very, very important. Very, very important. If I take this remote control and I say it is tangible object, it's got certain characteristics, and it can cause harm in a given situation. So a remote like this, standing alone, it is a hazard. So anything that you can touch, see, feel, and see, it is a hazard. Very, very important. Anything that you can touch, that is tangible, you can see, is a hazard. Meaning a fire is a fire and it will always be a hazard. A remote control is a remote control. It will remain tangible, it will remain a hazard. A computer will always remain a hazard. We're going to learn at a later stage the different interactions as well as the energies of these hazards. But what hazards are, you cannot say something is a hazard today and tomorrow is not a hazard. Hence, we are arguing dispositions, human acts, conditions, and situations which can change. But a hazard does not change. A fire will not change. If you put a lion in the wild, it will still be a lion. It will still be a hazard. Even if you put it in a zoo, in a cage, it does not matter where you put it, it will still remain a hazard. In a true sense, all things in life offer or pose some or other kinds of risk level or safety risk to our safety. Even the food that we eat, can still remain a hazard. Keep that in mind. Therefore, living is all about dealing with hazards and safety risk on a daily basis. One can understand safety only if one really understands what hazards are, how they interact, which I said we're going to be looking at later on, and what the role they play in life, in business, in industry, and in our society. Everything that is tangible, that can move on its own or be moved by another force, and that can harm you, is a hazard. Some hazards may be more dangerous or harmful than others. We constantly interact with hazards every moment of the day. Remember, very important, once a hazard, always a hazard. Thank you.